Okay, so Matthew 15. Before getting into 21 and dealing with the Canaanite woman, wanted to go back into verse 14 and discuss this section about the blind leading the blind, because we use verse 14 in a sermon, but didn't get the time to break it down and deal with some application points that we are definitely need to keep in mind as we move forward into chapter 16, because this phrase, what's happening here, is going to set the framework and the foundation for chapter 16, and how that it's going to say that Jesus is going to depart and he's going to leave behind the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And it's going to be a little while until we actually see them come back in to the picture again. And that's being done on purpose. So Jesus says, let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Now, with this phrasing of let them alone, I've heard some brethren that will try to use this and say, well, just denominational people, people that don't believe like you do, just need to leave them alone and not mess with them, so on and so forth. But is that what Jesus is saying here? Is Jesus just saying, look, let them do what they're wanting to do, and you just go about your business and do what you're wanting to do?
They're of the same faith, and they're not listening.
Okay.
I know that it's not true. I mean, God, He wants us to get out there and get the word to Him.
Okay, that's right. So the very fact, so it goes back into Matthew 7, not casting your pearls before swine. All right, that's true, but what do you have to do first?
Try again.
All right, you first have to try and find out, who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with swine? Am I dealing with dogs? So on and so forth. So even with this, but especially in this context, what have the apostles just come to Jesus and told him about the Pharisees?
They were offended.
All right, you've offended them. And Jesus' response is, don't even worry about that. Let them alone. Let them be offended. Because as we've already studied, chapter 15, where is Jesus when this takes place? Nope. When this whole event with the Pharisees takes place. We made a big point about it.
Oh, in the temple?
No.
What I meant was.
Well, they traveled 60 miles.
There you go.
So,
Jesus is in Gennesaret, which is 60 miles away. So they've traveled 60 miles at least to be able to question him on this line. So pretty much you just traveled 60 miles to get offended is pretty much what's going on. And then you want me to, oh, poor you. No, that's not what's happening here. Let them alone. They're blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Now, when it comes to this topic of blindness, this has been a recurring theme, has it not, in Jesus' teaching? Several times he's used this phrasing or used this topic about being blind. Matthew 13, 14 through 15. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with the heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Here is the goal. You see, you hear, you understand, and when that happens, you're being converted over, you're being changed. So even in this process, or even during this time frame, the mindset of conversion is there. That even inside of Judaism, which was given to them by God, Jesus has come so as to convert people. And the reason for that is because the Pharisees and Sadducees have come in with their own traditions and their own doctrines, and this is no longer what God has instituted. So the Pharisees had closed their eyes to the real meaning of what was being presented and what was being taught. And they misunderstood the spiritual application of those physical elements. So what was it that they traveled 60 miles to ask Jesus about?
Washing hands.
What was it?
Washing hands.
All right, washing your hands. Why is it that your apostles, your disciples, eat with unwashed hands? Seriously, traveling 60 miles to ask me that. And then you're not even properly understanding what that whole defilement is supposed to represent and what it's supposed to make you think about.
How would they even know that, being 60 miles away? There's Jesus in another town. They go, hey, there's no phone calls. They don't have texting or nothing. Like, how did he know? How did they know?
They had better eyesight.
Wasn't it just any little thing that they could get him on?
Pretty much, yeah.
The mindset.
Yeah, like with the Sabbath day, any little thing. I mean, even the woman that's taken in adultery, I am fully persuaded that that was a scheme that they just hatched up. Like, why would we even consider that the Pharisees are telling the truth, that they actually caught this woman in adultery? It's just anything that they can try to do. But even there, if it was a situation that they, let's just say perhaps, and that's just the thing, yeah, you just happen to come upon this woman in the act, that's pretty coincidental that you just happen to be at the right place at the right time to catch somebody in the act. But anyways, yeah, it's just every little thing that they can do, try to do, so as to undermine what's being presented. And every time that they try to do that, what do they end up showing about themselves? They end up showing they're not as smart, they're not as wise as they try to present themselves. And so even in this context, we mentioned about missing out the physical elements, going all the way back to Matthew 6, Sermon on the Mount. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? And that this finds its application as we've been studying. Everything that we're going through in the book of Matthew finds its application first with us, because Jesus is speaking to God's people. And he is saying these things to the people of God. Now just think about all of the light that the Jews had received. All throughout their history. Law of Moses, they have the history books, the Judges, the Psalms, the prophets. All of that light that's been shown to them. And yet they stumble around as men that are in the dark. They're blind. Thus we have the very point. How great is that darkness? That it can come in and squash out and put out that light. If it can happen to the Pharisees, if it can happen to the Jews, it can happen to us. And that's the reality of all of this. We can start molding Christianity into what we want it to be. We see it all around us with the denominational world, but if they're able to do it, we can do it. And so we have to make sure that we're staying on guard. So, as we said, blindness not only happens in false religions, but it is shown in this context that even in God's religion also, these things are happening. So just consider some points on how it is that blindness creeps in and what it actually does to us. You take, for example, Calvinism. Calvinism teaches that before man is even created, that God chooses if he will be saved or if he will be lost, simply by God's own desire. That man, and then even then, man has no chance of changing. He has no control over his outcome. How will that cause a person to think about God? They say first impressions are the most important, and that's your first impression about God, is that you have been chosen to either be saved or be lost, and even then you really don't even know which is which. Even those that would claim to be part of the elect, they don't even know it.
Well, I think it would shut off every kind of
Mm-hmm. And really, that should be a frightening thing, to have that mindset of, well, I'll just figure it out once I leave this earth. Man, that's terrible. But that's what blindness will do, blind to the true nature of who God is. That when it comes to the creation, I mean the entire creation and the creation event, what we're being shown is that God desires fellowship with His creation. And that's what you have in the garden. There's a direct line of communication between Adam, Eve, and with God. And then when sin comes in, that's severed. And the whole history of man is about trying to get back to that. What is that showing about God? What it is that He desires. He desires that closeness. And that He even puts a scheme of redemption inside of that to ultimately bring people back to that. All right? And then you have just a blindness. Blindness creates this individuals to be blinded to what truth actually is. That we can, in fact, read the Bible and do so with a desire to actually cover our eyes. Some people will study and they will read for that very purpose. Well, I'm going to go through the Bible not to find out what the truth actually is, but to find elements that actually build up what my truth is. And that creates a blindness. To cover our eyes even from what the Bible calls sin. To where we will no longer call sin for what it is, for what the Bible actually calls sin. That we will try to make excuses and that we will try to find loopholes. Just like the Pharisees were doing. Oh, don't commit adultery. But it's not a sin to look and lust. Based on what? Well, based on our interpretation. You mean based on your blindness. These are not sins. Don't murder, but no, it's not a sin to be angry with your brother. And it's not a sin to actually then go to the next level of actually cursing your brother. Based on what? Based on their blindness. And we understand, you just look at our society today. Why is it that we have everybody pushing for this idea of, well, just do what you want to do? Like, what's the mentality behind that?
Well, even the word sin is an antiquated word that brings forth mirth when you use it outside of Christianity or accepted, whatever Christian in quotes. It's just people want to be left alone to revel in their own sinful life, not to be reminded that they are sinners and be pricked in the heart.
Yeah. And it's the idea that, well, if you just let people do what they want to do, they'll be happier, right? But is that the case? No. You let a child just go into whatever they want to get into, eventually they're going to get hurt. Same thing happens when you go into adulthood. But when we're considering from the standpoint of the Pharisees, here are the Pharisees and they're in power. Why would people in power want to make all of these excuses and give all of this extra forgiveness? Just think of, go ahead. Where you
So
going?
that they get forgiveness when they're doing their stuff illegally or whatever.
Okay. So just think about Biden's student loan debt forgiveness. What's that all about?
So that when we find out he's a pedophile, we'll forgive him. Oh, maybe for the country debt?
No.
Okay, whatever.
Midterms are coming up, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to buy votes. What do you think they're doing by letting all of this stuff go? Well, keep us in control, and this is what you get. It's all tied in to what we're facing today. You allow people to do these type of things, and even in the denominations. Well, once you're saved, you're always saved. What does that do? It gives you liberty to do whatever you want to do. I can understand why people would want to go to the Baptist church down the street. I can't be condemned for anything. I can't be faced with any consequences of my actions. But then, here comes the Church of Christ, and what do we want to do? We want to hold people to a standard. That no, if you're actually going to call yourself a Christian, you've got to live like it. And thus, if you're not going to live like it, you can't call yourself a Christian. That doesn't sound too good. Doesn't sound too appealing. But it's like we mentioned before about thinking about the negative consequences of this very situation. Yeah, they let you get away with stuff, but what are they doing at the same time? What are the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the ones in control? What do they do to people that are underneath them?
Press.
Under the thumb. And that's what Jesus says in Matthew 23. They bind heavy burdens on you that they would not even consider lifting with one of their little fingers. So are you really winning under this system? No, you're not. But they give you a little bit of freedom and you think, well, yeah, I'm free. No. That's slavery. That's bondage. To where it's like what they say about us today. We really don't have freedoms. We have privileges. We no longer have freedoms in this country. It's our government giving us privilege. And that's not the same. And that's what's going on here. All right, yeah, we'll give you a few privileges here and there, but you're under bondage to them. And Jesus has come so as to set a different standard. No, if you really want liberty, if you really want freedom, just do what God says. Follow God, follow me, follow Christ, and you will really be getting what it is that you're desiring. But there's blindness because of that. They're blinded by all of these different elements, and thus they end up missing out on what's really there. So there's a blinding to the truth, there's a blinding that comes then to sin, and thus ultimately bringing a blindness to our real needs. Pride really is a chief sin when it comes to all that we do, because that blinds us to our real position and to our real needs. And it keeps us from being able to study with an honest heart, an honest mind, with the idea that I'm not coming to the Bible to find what I want, but I'm simply coming to the Bible to find what's right, to find what's true, to find truth, and even if that truth ends up condemning me, and that in view of that condemnation that I'll change to what I'm supposed to be molded into. So when we think about this blindness that's happening to the Pharisees, and even Paul writes about it in, I think it's in Romans, I'll just go with my gut, Romans 11, where he says that in part blindness has come upon Israel, to where they, in having all of the Old Testament, having all of those prophets foretelling of the coming Messiah, and then now he's here. But then Israel wanted to reject him. That very thing can end up applying to us. We can have all this information, have all of this teaching, but then there's something in there that we don't like, we don't desire, or something that's not fitting into what we think should be the case, and that blindness happens to us. So any other thoughts, questions, comments on this blindness before we jump ahead to 21? Okay. So as we said, during that section, Jesus is in Gennesaret, which is around this section of the Sea of Galilee. Jerusalem is down here, 60 miles, be able to travel. Traveling by foot, It's going to take you a few days. Chariot, so on and so forth, maybe a little bit less.
That's from Polson to Missoula.
Ah, very good. Okay, so just imagine walking from here to Missoula. Yeah, I like that. Put it in context. But then you drop down to verse 21. Then Jesus went thence and departed into the coast of Tyre and Sidon. So now we're moved on from this section here to now we're over here, and he's over by the Mediterranean Sea. He's now gone to the coast. And this is where he meets the Canaanite woman. Now you just look at, again, we've already discussed 60 miles from here to Jerusalem. Now are we going closer to Jerusalem or we're going farther away?
Further away.
Now why do you think that is?
Saying, is it going up?
Huh?
Is it going upward?
What do you mean?
No.
Well, he's getting more and more away from the Jews. Isn't he in the land of the Sumerians?
Yeah.
Where, so he's getting away from the official Jews, and he's taking it out to others than the Jews.
Okay. Even when we're considering the birth of Christ, and it's in Matthew 2, where it was that it was said that Jesus was, in fact, it was prophesied that Jesus was going to spend most of his time, that light would be taken into, okay, into the land of the Gentiles. And here's Jesus, and he's moving further and further north, and he's getting further and further away from Jerusalem, because they're not wanting to receive what it is that he has. So Jesus is born in Nazareth. He sets up camp in Capernaum. He's just been in Gennesaret, and now he moves further north away from Jerusalem. And he goes into the area of the Gentiles. For us to focus on Jesus telling the apostles, Matthew 10, go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and then to ignore what is happening in this chapter and who Jesus ends up running into in this chapter. That in this very ministry of Christ, he is involved with Gentile people the whole entire time. And that he's in fact practicing what he will tell his apostles to do later. In the Great Commission, when Jesus tells them to go into all the world and preach to every creature, here Jesus is already going to be doing that. He's already done it in John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman at the well, Matthew 8 with the Roman centurion, and there's somebody else that was in there as well that we've noted Gentile involvement. But once you get into this section, it's beyond argument that Jesus and God are only focused on Israel or the Jews at this time. Verse 22, and behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. She is a Canaanite, which is from this Greek word, and it has this interpretation definition, Canaanian or native of Gentile Palestine. So this is her home country. She's not a Jew. She is, in fact, a Canaanite. But then you go over to Mark's account, and Mark gives us a little bit more detail on who this woman is. Mark 7:24, and from thence he arose and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon, and entered into an house, and would have no man know it, but he could not be hid. For a certain woman, whose young daughter had an unclean spirit, heard of him, and came and fell at his feet. And the woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation. And she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. Syrophoenician, a female native of Phoenicia in Syria. And this is the person. Out of all of Israel, this is the person who comes and bows down at Jesus' feet and worships. Is he getting that kind of reception inside of Jerusalem? Inside of Judea? Are Jews flocking to him and bowing down at his feet? No, they're not. And to take it a step further, as to what's happening here, we need to go back into the Old Testament right quick so as to get some context, to take something into consideration. Leviticus 18:24, beginning. The people of Israel are being warned and they're being told, here's what you do not do when you go into the land of promise. Defile not ye yourselves in any of these things, for in all these the nations are defiled which I cast out before you. And the land is defiled, therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomiteth out her inhabitants. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, neither any of your own nations, nor any stranger that sojourneth among you. For all these abominations have the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled. So here's a description that's being given of a Canaanite. They've defiled the land. They're involved in abominations. The land is vomiting them out. That the land spew not you out also when ye defile it. Notice it doesn't say if you defile it, it says when you defile it. So they're being told their future here. As it spewed out the nation that were before you. For whosoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the souls that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore shall ye keep mine ordinance, that ye commit not any one of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that ye defile not yourselves therein. I am the Lord your God. So what God is telling to his people, and especially in this section here about the whosoever, this is not just a Canaanite problem of defiling the land. If it was, then there'd be no need for warning God's people. But God is warning his people, look, you are very capable of doing the same things that they are doing. And the things that are happening to them will in fact happen to you if you do them. So way back here, before Israel goes into the land of Canaan, what kind of playing field are they being put on? Equal playing field. The Jews should have never had any type of mentality to where they're up here, Gentiles are down here. Because the very same punishment that's being placed on them is being given to you if you do those things.
Which is interesting because that same thought process is carried through even with people in the denominations as they consider Jews.
That's right.
Still
Yeah.
the chosen people to this day.
Yep. Now, so on that point, defile not ye yourselves in any of these things, for in all these the nations are defiled, which cast out before you. Why is it that God is casting the Canaanites out? Is it because Israel is just so good? Israel is just so special? Israel is just so honorable? No. He is casting them out because of the sins they have committed, not because Israel is so good. And then you have in this context, as we said, God is telling them the very same thing. Hey, you do what they do, I'm casting you out. There's no special treatment here. Because sin is sin. And the reason why these people are being cast out is because of where they come from. Everybody comes from Noah. Noah worshiped God. So when his sons came off the ark, they knew about God, and when they separated, they took God with them. But as it happens throughout history, as it happens with mankind, that gets polluted. And that's the reason why God could come in and cast them out as he did. They already know about him. They've just forgotten him. So, yeah, they're blind. Very good. So the Canaanite lost the land because of their sinfulness. And as we said, the Jews did not get it because they were so righteous. And in fact, Moses tells the Jews over and over again, God did not choose you because you were the greatest, you were the strongest, or you were the most righteous. Moses lays it out clear for them. The only reason why you're benefiting the way that you're benefiting is because of the promises that were made to your fathers. So what does that do, or should do to them in perspective? Oh, okay, it's because of what they did, we're being blessed because of what they did. It's not because we're so good right now. And it's the same thing for us. With us being Christians, why do we have the benefit of being where we are? It's because of those promises and everything that's come down the line. It's not just because we're just so good. What'd you have, Jamie?
I was just going to say, going back to your statement about pride, so that pride just continually just allowed them to be blind, and it followed them to this day.
Yeah. And so even with that, you just take into consideration, how is it that that pride would come into play? It's really going to depend on your teacher. If your teacher wants to take that information and only focus on all the good elements of your history, all the good parts about who Israel is, what will that do to a people?
Well, they're going to look for David to be
Yeah, exactly.
put back on the throne.
It gives you a false representation of who you actually are. So you can't go through and just cherry pick and it's like, oh yeah, here's what God says about us and how He loves us and how He cherishes us and we're the apple of His eye. Yeah, all that's true. But why? And what about this? Oh, no, we don't talk about this as much. So you elevate these different elements and you deflect and you push back sections like this, where Jew and Gentile are being put on the same foothold. All right, so when Jesus now comes, the nation of Israel has lost its way. They are right back in the same boat that they were in with the prophets before captivity was coming. Same type of corruption, same type of pollution. They are accusing, Israel is accusing Jesus of blasphemy as he's going about teaching and preaching, but then here is a woman that's outside of Palestine, and this is her lineage. This is what happened to her grandfathers, great-grandfathers. But then what happens to her in contrast to what happens to the Jews? Behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast, cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So here it is again, what we had in Matthew 10 with the apostles. Do not go to the Gentiles, do not go to Samaria, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And now Jesus is restating that. This statement shows who should have been receiving him first. There's a pecking order in this. And even Paul states it. We went to the Jews first, you've rejected it, now we go to the Gentiles. Jesus is already involved in that. He came unto his own, but his own received him not. So what do you do with that? You go to where you're going to be received. Israel has been rejecting him this entire time. So where does Jesus have to go to find acceptance? He goes outside of Israel. Then she came and worshiped him, saying, Lord, help me. This is a sign of what is coming. Jesus came not just to save the Jews only. He came to save everyone, to heal everyone of their diseases and especially spiritual sickness. And that this we have been a picture of what's going to happen at Pentecost. You're going to have Jews coming from every nation. Many of those Jews are proselytes. And that is going to be a stepping stone to take the gospel back out into those Gentile realms. Strangers from Rome. Rome is way away from Palestine. But they're going to come and they're going to get the gospel and they're going to take it home with them. And then you take into consideration verse 26, but he answered and said, it is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. She said, truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Verse 26, it's not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. But Jesus has already said something about the children and their connection to the kingdom and what's going to happen to them. Think back to Matthew 8. We have a similar statement that's being said about this Canaanite woman that was said about the Roman centurion. Jesus said to the Roman centurion, I've not seen so great faith, no, not in all Israel. And then Jesus makes a statement about who's going to come into the kingdom.
Coming from the east and the west.
All right, go ahead and read it.
Well, okay. I say to you that many will come from the east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven.
Okay? So east, west, north, south. That's four corners. That's everybody. All right? That's Gentile. What does verse 12 say?
But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. So that probably says children.
Yeah.
Okay. So the children of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
So Jesus has already said in Matthew 8, what's going to happen to the children? They're going to be cast out.
Burned up. Yeah.
There'll be weeping, wailing, gnashing of teeth. Now, we get over here to verse 26 of Matthew 15. And now he's saying that it's not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. What's happening here?
Well, he has to state his position, that it goes first to the children, but she pleads with him and begs him, we can still get the crumbs.
Yeah.
And then by her faith, it shows. So it's, and this miracle is showing that is going to the Gentiles once again.
That even with the Gentiles under the Old Testament system, wasn't there a little bit of light that was going to them? As we said, they came from Noah. They had the light of God, but then it got darkened. And then you consider Abraham. Abraham wandered all over Canaan. And what was he doing? Everywhere that he went and everywhere that he set up camp, what did he also build? Altars. Everywhere Abraham went, he's building altars, places of worship. And he's doing that all throughout Canaan. Isaac does the same, even Esau to a degree, and Jacob with his 12 sons until they find themselves in Egypt. And even with Egypt, the light of God gets brought in with Joseph. And not only with Egypt, you have everybody coming to Egypt because there's a famine in the land. So once again, the land of Canaan is being introduced to the God of Israel, the God of heaven. And even in the conquering of the land of Canaan, did they cast everybody out like they were supposed to? No. So what happens there? There's crumbs that are going through all throughout Gentile history. To where now, here's Jesus and he says, yeah, we're not needing to, it's not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. But we do not need to forget that Jesus already knows the children are going to be cast out. This is all a test that Jesus is presenting to this Canaanite woman. Just how hard are you going to press? Or will there be something there that's going to cause you to give up? Here's the issue. The Jews had the blood of Abraham in their veins, but lacking faith and opposing Jesus, they are cut off from the blessings of God. Here's Israel, and Jesus is taking his miracles and taking his blessings, and now he's gone up here to Tyre and Sidon. And here's a woman without Abraham's blood. Her ancestors were cast out of the land because of sins. But now she enjoys the blessings of Christ. And that not because of the blood that runs through her veins, but because of her faith. Notice, she comes and cried unto him, saying, "Have mercy on me." As we mentioned in chapter 14, this is the beginning of getting any blessings that God has to bestow to us, is first realizing and knowing our need. What need does Israel have? We see it at John's baptism. Oh, we don't have need of repentance for the remission of sins. Why? We're Abraham's seed. They're blinded to what's going on because they're in the system. And yet here is somebody who's outside of the system, recognizing what the Jews are ignoring, comes down, bows down, and cries out, "Have mercy." This woman is poor in spirit. She is humble, not proud. And she recognizes she hasn't merited anything. What has she done that has brought Jesus up to Tyre and Sidon? Nothing other than God's good graces. And then also notice the statement, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou Son of David." That is a very peculiar statement to be made by a Gentile. How is it? How did she know that Jesus was the Son of David? How does she even know that that even plays into a factor of who he's supposed to be?
Well, it just shows her faith.
All right.
She knows that there's a Messiah coming.
Okay.
And she believes it to be him.
All right. Where does faith come from?
Word of God.
Hearing by the Word of God. Somewhere along the line, she's gotten a hold of some Scripture. But she's way up here in the north. The Word of God has no boundaries. All throughout Israel's history in the captivity, what were they involved in building because they could not go to the temple? Where did Jesus go to do his teaching and his preaching? In the synagogues. There is light that has come to the Gentiles. And now here's a Gentile lady, and she comes saying, "Have mercy on me, Son of David." She's far away from Jerusalem, but as we've just said, this shows some knowledge of the Old Testament. Thus you have another Gentile just like Cornelius. How did Cornelius know to give alms? To pray to God, to fear God? There is some light that has come to the Gentiles. They're not just left out here by themselves. She begs for mercy. And that because, not for herself, but for the love of her daughter. Again, notice the attitude of the disciples. He answered her not a word. His disciples came and besought him, saying, "Send her away, for she crieth after us." There is still no pity on the part of the apostles. Here we are in chapter 15. What just happened in chapter 14?
He commanded them to go out and feed so that they could have compassion like he had compassion.
Jesus had compassion on the multitude to feed them, and the disciples want to send them away. All right, then what happened after that?
Calmed the wind.
The disciples are in the middle of a storm. And what are they needing?
Love and compassion.
Mercy and compassion. Now here we are with this Canaanite woman, and her daughter is vexed. Have mercy on me.
Yippee little dog.
They're still not getting it. No pity for this Gentile woman. And then we have to look at Christ. What will he do? Will he overlook her? Will he withhold his blessings? No, look at it. And what would you do if you were met with this phrasing, with this statement? You come asking for help and this is said to you. What would you do?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is a test of character. But it's also a test for the apostles in showing them, who are you to be compassionate to? It goes into the parable of the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Oh, it's just those that live in Palestine. No. Or as the atheist told us in Virginia, it's those that live within a 2-mile radius of you. No. Your neighbor is everyone. Who are we supposed to help? Everyone that's in need. You mean even this Gentile woman? This Canaanite that God kicked out of the land in the first place? Yeah. Because don't you remember God kicked you out of the land too? What was captivity? But God kicking you out of the land because you defiled it. You cannot be looking down your nose at these people. And especially in consideration of her crying out for mercy. Think about Peter, chapter 14. Lord, if it truly be you, then bid me come out on the water. All right, come. Peter starts sinking. And what were the next words out of his mouth? Lord, save me. What is she saying? Have mercy on me. That should have hit Peter really hard. It's like, well, she sounds just like me. But you see how easy it is to forget? What you got?
I was just going to say, I was just thinking in Galatians, where he's still struggling.
Yeah.
Even after all that time.
Yeah.
With the help of the Holy Spirit. He
Yep.
still struggles with his racism.
Yep.
And then Jesus is tempted in every way like us. So I wonder what he's thinking when they just.
Oh yeah, the frustration
just,
that
you guys, because it's gonna keep happening.
is going to keep happening.
Until he dies, and even after.
So here we have the building up. And even, so as we said, to the test of the apostles, we have a building up and a showing of, well, who really is the house of Israel that Jesus has come to save? Is it just those in Jerusalem? Jesus is showing to the apostles what the kingdom will be like. Go teach every nation, ethnos, every race. Is the house of Israel, is it just those that have Abraham as their physical father? Or will it be those stones that God will raise children out of? That's what John the Baptist said to the Pharisees and Sadducees on the banks of the Jordan River. Do not say unto yourselves that we have Abraham for our father, for God can raise up children of Abraham out of these stones.
I would have liked to have seen that.
Yeah, that would have been good. But the framework, the foundation's already being set. You are not an Israelite just by your physical qualities. In going forth and teaching every nation, yes, teach every Jew in every nation. But they're not the only ones.
Well, hasn't he, if I interrupt, just one.
Now go for it.
Quick point. Hasn't he already said whosoever will?
That's right.
So,
And the fact that the whosoever will is not happening in Israel, physical Israel, then where do we have to go to make up Israel? We've got to go outside. So in fact, this Canaanite woman, she is that Jew which is one inward, not outward. Romans 2, 28 and 29. It is not circumcision that is done in the flesh, but it's circumcision that's done on the heart. And thus you have Galatians 3, 26. For ye are all the children of God by the blood of Abraham. No, that's not what makes a person a child of God. Ye are all the children of God by faith, and that faith being in Christ Jesus. The law of Moses alone did not make a person a Jew. The law of Christ alone does not make a person a Christian. The missing element for Israel that this woman has, and very likely the missing point for us, and what makes us a child of God, is this element of faith. That I can go through the letter of the law, keep it. But if I'm not doing it by faith, then what am I gaining? Absolutely nothing. And that's where Israel is. We've got the law, do the law, and they're thinking that the law saves them. And they've completely removed God from the picture. We can go through the same thing. Symbol on Sunday, symbol midweek, do our Bible studies, go out and evangelize. And if we're not doing that by faith, we're just simply doing it because the Bible tells us to, we're right back here. And that we're not in that same position with this Canaanite woman where she is willing to throw herself at Jesus' feet and even be able to admit of herself, I'm a dog. I'm just wanting the crumbs. And it's that kind of attitude that keeps us from the stage of the Pharisees. That we're constantly recognizing that need that she's illustrating. So, any other thoughts, questions, comments on that point before we move a little bit further? Okay, verse 25. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. We need to be careful when we come to sections of Scripture that we're not putting our own thought processes into what the text is actually doing. Because this word dog is a different Greek word from what you have, say, like in Philippians chapter 3, where Paul is saying, beware of dogs. This Greek word is actually discussing a puppy. Now, when we put that definition into this context, does it sound as severe or as strong as how we might read it oftentimes? No, we're getting a picture of how Jesus is actually viewing her. And with this, she's not hindered. She bows, she comes, and possibly prostrates herself. She's flat out on the ground and says, Lord, help me. As we said, just like with Peter. So if anyone should have sympathy in this section, it should be Peter in all of this. And she said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. So she does not deny how the Jews viewed her, or even how she might even view herself, and that because of her lineage and all the evil that the Gentiles did. But just look at this scene that's being pictured. Jesus says it's not fit to take the children's bread and cast it to the pups. And then she even says, well, yeah, but even the pups eat the crumbs that are of the master's table. She's already in the house with this discussion. So we're not dealing with some Pablo mutt that's just running around. Yeah, thank you. But in fact, this is what we're dealing with. This is the scene. This is the illustration. And you've just got to think about what's going through the apostles' mind at this point. That here they are throughout all their history, and they're pushing the Gentiles to the side because this is how they're viewed. But then Jesus comes along and he has compassion. This is a puppy that's in the house just desiring something to fall her way. And as we said, even in the Old Testament, the Gentiles had a limited access to the blessings of the Jews, but they still had access to the blessings. To where Jesus then answered. Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. She was able to see what the Jews could not see. They were blind, but her eyes were wide open. And we have the script flipping here. The Jews are now getting limited blessings, while the Gentiles are getting more. She was not going to give up, even with the prejudices that the Jews had against her. She recognized the blessings that were there. And yet, how many today will give up at the smallest insult that gets thrown their way? But remember why it is that she's asking these things of Jesus in the first place. She's not asking them for herself. Who's she asking them for? Her daughter. Okay? This is life or death for her daughter. Are you just going to stop at the first roadblock when it comes to trying to save your daughter's life? No. You press on. You keep going. She knew how bad her daughter needed what Jesus had. And she was not going to give up. So we should learn, no matter what gets thrown in our path, we cannot quit. If you quit and leave the church, what hope do you have out there in the world? And just as we said, her daughter's life was in the balances. Our souls hang in the balance. Are we willing to give up on something that even the entire world holds no value to? That I'm just going to stop on my Christian walk and my journey and just allow my soul to die? But that's what individuals are doing. They're allowing their faith to grow weak, and they walk away from Christ, they walk away from the church, and they just give up. That's a "O ye of little faith" situation, not a "great is thy faith" situation. Now, you just consider everything that's gone on through this entire context, and then Jesus wraps it up nicely and puts a little bow on the top of it and calls it what? He calls it faith. But look at everything she's done. She's come to him, she's found him, she's fallen down and worshiped him, she's cried out saying, "Have mercy on me." She's debated with him, if you will. And then Jesus looks at all of that and he says, yeah, that's faith. So when we go further into the New Testament and we find sections that say that they were saved by faith, this is the picture. This is what that means. Doesn't mean just simply faith alone. That I'm just sitting around somewhere, it's like, okay, yeah, I believe. There is all kinds of action that's taking place here. In verse 29, Jesus departed from thence, came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee. So he's back. He's left the coast. He's returned to east. And went up into a mountain and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to be whole, the lame to walk, and the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. That's an interesting description. This gives us further insight to the kind of people that Jesus is dealing with. It's insinuating God was not their God. But because of the miraculous works that Jesus is performing, they are in fact recognizing the God of Israel and that they're going to worship him. Mark 7:31, we're told, and again departing from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, he came unto the Sea of Galilee there, through the midst of the coast of Decapolis, to give us further insight as to where he's actually landing. Verse 32, Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. So here we are, right back where we started in this same chapter, Matthew 15. I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting lest they faint in the way. So we're going to stop there at 32. I forgot how many extra notes I had on these passages, so we're going to stop there and pick up with it next time. Jesus just continuing his work. He's continuing to move from place to place to place. But as we're pointing out, he's still around the Sea of Galilee. He's not getting any closer to Jerusalem. Because the closer he gets to Jerusalem, the closer he gets to his death. And it's not time for that yet. So, any thoughts, comments, questions? Canaanite woman, application from that, her faith, character? All right. Then if there is nothing else, then we will take a brief pause.